These days I'm reading a very good book, The Crimean War by historian Orlando Figes. It is spelled Figes. Very informative, very well written, well narrated. I'm really enjoying it. And it tells you about a conflict that somehow has been forgotten by modern historiography. It is a war that happened in the middle of 19th century when a coalition of Western European states, together with the Ottoman Empire, attacked Russia in an attempt to counteract the recent attempt to expand in the Balkanic area. The Allies landed in Crimea and started fighting there. As I'm reading this book, of course, I also want to play games that allow me to refight the major conflicts, the major battles in that war, because I think that is just the best way to understand history. And I started from a game called The Battle of the Alma for the very simple reason that the Battle of the Alma is the first major battle of that war. The Allied had recently landed in Crimea and they were moving south, trying to reach their major target, which was the city of Sevastopol. On their way there, the Russian army met them at the Alma River that was chosen because of the advantages that the terrain would give to the defender there. And what happened then, you can figure out by reading the book, and also you can learn and understand better by playing this game, which it's an old game, 1978, still can be found very easily online for very reasonable prices. It is designed by Frank Chadwick, and that is interesting to me because Frank Chadwick is the same designer of Betafom, a game that I played and reviewed recently, and I liked that game a lot. Also, this game came out in the same series where Betafom came out originally, so they share the same, let's call it game philosophy, so, well, a lot of reasons to be optimistic about this game. This is the map, which is printed on thick paper. It may look unattractive by contemporary standards, I believe, mainly because of all this blank background here, but actually I like the fact that with such a simple background, the few landscape features that really matter stand out and you can see them very easily. And here these features are the Alma River here, and then you see these dark lines here that represent the slopes that the Allied army will have to go through. What you see here is also the initial setup, their units, but not many of them that you can set up freely. The majority of the initial placement will be pre-established by the rules of the game. Here you have the French section of the army with a little bit of help from the Turkish army. Here you have the British section of the army, and these are the Russian units that are trying to defend their position. There are four main types of units: artillery, infantry, cavalry, and mounted artillery. Each unit has four pieces of numerical information on it, and these are morale, the number up here, and the Allied units have much better morale than the Russian units, and this will be very important in the game. This number here on the left is fire, then you have melee, and then you have movement. A turn is divided in several phases, and first the active player will go through all those phases, and then the non-active player will do the same. The first phase is movement. The active player in this phase moves any and all of his units up to the movement value of each unit, and of course axes will have a different cost in terms of movement depending on the terrain. Moving on a slope, of course, will be more expensive in terms of movement points than moving in clear terrain. Also, units project a zone of control in the 6 axes surrounding them, and once you enter a zone of control of an enemy unit, then you have to stop immediately. That movement for the turn is over. And not only that, but also next turn, the player that is moving will not be allowed to move a unit from one zone of control to another zone of control. Will have to either stay there or to move out of zone of control. And this is very important for the Russian player because he will have to exploit this a lot in order to slow down the Allied units, trying to keep them for as long as possible on the lower side of the slope. It is also very important that you keep track of which units of the active player moved for reasons that I will explain later. And this game doesn't come with any markers, so I suggest that you use markers from other games to do so. These days I'm playing Men of Iron, so I have these markers around, and so once I move a unit, I just place a marker there to remind me of the units that moved. The text doesn't really match, but it doesn't matter. The size is right, so that's fine enough by me. Several events during the game may cause your units to rout. The rules suggest to place a routed unit face down, but I find that inconvenient because you need to look at the values of that unit. So what I do instead is just I place it upside down like this. During the rally phase, which is the phase right after movement, you can try to rally all of your routed units. You roll a die, and if you roll a number which is equal to or lower than the morale value, then that unit is rallied and goes back to its normal state. Otherwise, the routed unit will move by its full movement factor towards the friendly edge of the map, which for the Russian player is the southern edge of the map, for the Allied player is the north side of the map, and if a routed unit keeps being routed and moving to the point of exiting the map, then that unit is eliminated. After the rally phase, infantry and cavalry units, which are adjacent to enemy units, can declare a charge. You simply have to announce which units are going to attack which units, but you really need to remember what the commitments are, because charge will be resolved later in the turn. So it would be useful to have markers to do that. Luckily enough, in Men of Iron, again I have that around my desk these days, there are charge markers, so I use those to indicate which units are going to charge which units later in the turn. Then we get to the offensive fire phase, in which the active player can fire with his artillery and infantry units that did not move during the movement phase, and this is why it is important to keep track of which ones actually did move. Infantry can fire at adjacent units. Allied guns can fire up to a range of 3 axes, and Russian guns can fire up to 4 axes away. However, artillery loses 2 points of fire for each intervening X between the artillery unit and the target. Also, units, both friendly and enemy ones, will block the line of sight. Then you combine the combat factors of all the units firing at a single target, and you find the column that you will use on the combat table. The die roll on the fire combat table will be modified based on the melee factor of the defending unit. You will look at the melee factor of that unit, you will subtract the standard number 1, and that the number that you obtain will be added to the die roll of the attacker. So for example, a unit attacking this unit here, for -1 is 3, then the attacking unit will have a +3 modifier on their die roll. Units attacking this unit here will have a modifier of 0, so no modifier, because 1 minus 1 is 0. Then you cross-reference the modified die roll with the appropriate column, and you find the result, which may be that the defending unit is eliminated, or maybe nothing happens. If you have a number and that number is higher than the morale of the defending unit, then that unit routs and starts running towards the friendly edge of the map. So as you can see, there are certain Russian units that rout very easily, and certain British units that, on the contrary, will never rout under enemy fire. If that number is equal or less than the morale of the defending unit, then nothing happens. Then we get to the defensive fire phase, in which the non-active player can fire with his units that are being charged, and he can fire at the units that are charging them. Also in this phase, the non-active player can fire with any and all of his guns, and it doesn't matter whether these units are being charged or not. And finally, last phase in a turn, we resolve the charges. Each charge will start with a preliminary roll. I will not explain this into detail, but it may just be that based on that roll, the horses of the cavalry charging will refuse to perform the charge, so the charge does not take place. Or it may be that the charge does take place, but it scares so much the defender that the defending infantry will run away even before the charge is completed. So you don't resolve the full charge, you just rout the defending unit. With infantry charging infantry, it's a little different because it's such a scary thing that based on that preliminary roll, either of the two units may be routed. It may even be that the attacker is so freaked out by the charge that he routes away, or the defender will rout away before the full charge is completed. If all units in a charge are still there when the impact happens, then you resolve the charge based on two separate differentials that are combined together. You subtract the melee factor of the defender from that of the attacker, then you subtract the morale of the defender, which is under there, from the morale of the attacker. You combine those two differentials and you have the final melee value for that combat. At that point, you cross-reference the die roll with the final melee factor for that combat, and you have the result, which may indicate that the defender retreats by 2x's, or the defender routs, or the defender is eliminated, or the attacker routs, or the attacker retreats by 2x's. So first I read the section of the book about the battle, then I played the game, I went back, I reread that section. I must say that the game really got the job done, because now I have such a better understanding of all the events that happened, the mistakes that were made, things that could be done, things that could not have been done. And then after you play a war game about an event, you just remember the event so well. It's such a good way to remember things if you experience them first. As for the game per se, I believe that an interest in the topic is not just a plus, but almost a must. Otherwise, the game may feel static. Game after game, it may feel quite samey. But if you have an interest in the topic, then maybe you will want to try some what-if situations, and then it becomes more interesting. Maybe you may enjoy this game if you like the sort of like siege situation. It's clear that one side is the defender, the other side is the attacker, and also there's a situation where you know the defender is going to lose the battle, but the defender may still win the game if he manages to slow down the attacker for long enough. So the attacker is fighting against the defender and against the turn track that creates a sort of like countdown clock. You may enjoy this if you like this non-symmetrical situation of advantage of the position versus advantage in strength and numbers. So there are a variety of perspectives from which this game may be appealing. Overall, to me still, it is mainly something that is fascinating if you are fascinated in the historical events portrayed here. As I read the book, I will definitely play more games about battles involved in that happened during the Crimean War. I do not know yet whether or not I will be making reviews about the other games, but trust me, if I do, you'll be the first to know.